Before we continue, make sure to like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. This emotional Wild West story follows a widowed rancher and a giant Apache girl who finds warmth, safety, and unexpected love during the coldest night of their lives. Let's get started. Luke stood frozen in the doorway, the lantern light flickering across the young woman's trembling frame. Snow clung to her braids and lashes, melting into cold trails down her cheeks. She was enormous, broad-shouldered, long-limbed, taller than any woman Luke had ever seen. But fear had shrunk her, folding her inward like a wounded animal. He stepped aside without a word, motioning her in. The wind howled behind her as she ducked through the doorframe, her breath shaking as she clasped her arms around herself. Luke shut the door, sealing out the storm, but not the heaviness in her voice. She stood near the hearth, still shivering though the fire burned bright. Luke tossed more wood onto the flames, giving her space, letting her decide what she needed. She didn't speak at first, only watched him with eyes too old for her young face. When she finally found her voice, it cracked. "I did not mean to frighten you," she whispered. Luke shook his head. "You didn't?" She looked down at her large hands, ashamed of her size. "Most men fear me before I speak." Luke simply returned to stirring the stew. The warmth in the cabin slowly began seeping into her bones. She laid her horse blanket on the floor, watching the steam rise from her damp clothes. Luke offered her a towel and a place by the fire. She hesitated, pride flickering in her posture, but the cold finally broke her. She sank down in front of the crackling logs, stretching her long legs toward the heat. "My name is Sania," she murmured. Luke nodded, removing his hat respectfully. "Luke Carver." She repeated his name softly, as if testing its weight. When he handed her a bowl of stew, her hands trembled too much to grasp it. Luke steadied the bowl for her, and for a moment their fingers touched. She jerked back as if burned, startled by gentleness she wasn't used to. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Luke shook his head again. "You're freezing. Happens to anyone in weather like this?" She took the stew carefully this time, eating slowly, savoring each warm bite as if she hadn't tasted food in days. Luke kept his distance, letting her breathe, watching quietly as color returned to her cheeks. After finishing, she set the bowl aside and pulled her knees toward her chest. The firelight danced along her broad shoulders, revealing old scars, some small, some deep, each telling a story of survival. Luke didn't ask about them. He simply placed a thick quilt near her. She stared at it before touching it gently, as if she had forgotten softness existed. "Why are you alone out here?" Luke asked, voice low. Sania swallowed hard before answering. "My tribe, they moved south. I stayed behind with my mother. She grew sick. I buried her 3 nights ago." Luke's breath caught. Losing a mother. Losing anyone? Winter made grief twice as heavy. Sania continued, her voice barely above the fire's crackle. "After I laid her in the ground, I rode north. No food, no shelter. I thought, maybe the cold would take me before loneliness did." She looked at him then, her eyes glistening. "But when I saw your cabin light, I thought perhaps a man might share his warmth." Luke understood she didn't mean what her words suggested. She meant human warmth, kindness, presence, mercy. Things she clearly hadn't received in a long time. He moved a little closer, keeping a respectful distance, lowering himself to sit across from her. "You're safe here tonight," he said gently. "Warmth you'll have so long as you need it." Something in her posture broke, her shoulders sagging, breath shaking, the armor she wore beginning to melt. She reached toward the fire, palms open. "I didn't know a white man could speak gently," she admitted. Luke gave a soft, sad smile. "Most men out here are loud because they're empty inside. Quiet men save their strength for when it matters." Sania considered that, then nodded slowly. Her gaze drifted around the cabin's simple wooden walls. A worn table, tools hanging neatly in place. "You live alone?" she asked. Luke's jaw tightened. "My wife passed 2 winters ago. Fever took her fast." Sania lowered her eyes in respect. "You know grief," she said softly. "A man who knows grief understands cold that has nothing to do with winter." Luke inhaled deeply. Maybe that's why I opened the door. Their eyes met across the fire. Two different worlds tied together by loss and weather and the strange comfort of unexpected company. A long silence settled between them, not awkward, not heavy, simply human. The storm continued beating against the windows, but inside the cabin, warmth slowly grew. Sania pulled the quilt around herself, sinking deeper into its softness. "Luke, you saved me tonight," she murmured. "More than you know." He shook his head. "Anyone would've." She gave a faint, bittersweet smile. "Not anyone." "Not most?" Her head lowered slightly, exhaustion pulling at her. "May I sleep by the fire?" Luke nodded. "You can sleep wherever you feel safe." Her eyes softened at the word safe. As she lay down near the hearth, the flames reflected in her tired eyes. Luke rose to blow out the lanterns, but before he turned away, Sania's voice reached him, quiet, fragile, but honest. "I didn't come here to take anything from you," she whispered. "Just to feel like a person again. Just for one night." Luke paused, his hand resting on the lantern hook, his chest tightening at the vulnerability in her words. "Then that's exactly what you'll have," he promised softly. She closed her eyes, finally letting sleep take her, and as Luke watched her breathing slow, he realized something unexpected. Letting her in hadn't burdened his lonely cabin. It had brought back a warmth he thought he'd lost forever. Luke added another log to the fire, the flames crackling softly as warmth finally filled the small cabin. The storm outside beat against the shutters like a living thing, howling across the empty Wyoming flats. Inside, though, all that wild fury felt strangely distant. The young Apache girl, towering, broad-shouldered, built like a warrior carved from mountain stone, sat wrapped in the thickest quilt Luke owned, her knees pulled close to her chest like a frightened child. Snow melted from her long dark braids, dripping onto the floorboards. She kept watching him, studying every movement he made, how he wiped his boots, how he stirred the stew pot, how he worked with a quiet steadiness that seemed carved from patience itself. Most men she'd met either mocked her size or feared it. Luke did neither. He worked around her with the same gentleness he might offer a skittish horse. When he handed her a steaming bowl, she hesitated, as if kindness was a trap she didn't know how to approach. Her fingers trembled slightly as she took it. "You're safe here," Luke said softly, sitting across from her so she wouldn't feel cornered. "Storm will pass by morning. You can rest till then." She swallowed a spoonful of stew, then another, her hunger winning the battle against her caution. Her voice, when it finally came, was raw, almost ashamed. "I'm not used to men being gentle with me." Luke didn't rush to fill the silence. He simply nodded, as if her confession was something sacred instead of strange. "What's your name?" he asked. She lowered her eyes. "Nayeli, that's a strong name." She let out a hollow laugh. "Means I love you in my people's tongue. But no one ever says it to me." Luke felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same ache he'd carried since losing his wife years ago. Grief had taught him the weight of being unseen. He understood more than she could guess. "You deserve to hear it," he said. Nayeli's breath caught, and she looked away quickly, as though the truth of his words hurt more than the winter wind. Outside, thunder rolled not from storm clouds, but from snow collapsing off the mountainside. The fire flickered shadows across the walls, painting the room in soft gold. Luke studied her quietly. She was massive, yes, nearly 7 feet, and built like she could lift a horse on her back. But beneath that giant frame was a girl barely past 19, exhausted, frightened, carrying bruises that told stories she didn't yet have the strength to share. "Someone hurt you?" he asked gently. Nayeli flinched, her fingers tightening around the bowl. She didn't answer, but the look in her eyes told him enough. A bruise peeked from beneath the edge of the blanket, dark against her copper skin. "You don't have to tell me," Luke said softly. "Just know you're not alone tonight." Her shoulders sagged, as though she'd been holding her breath for years. "You shouldn't have opened the door," she whispered. "Men don't invite trouble inside." Luke leaned forward. "You're not trouble." She looked at him then, really looked, her eyes deep, searching. as if she needed to make sure he wasn't lying. "No man ever said that to me," she murmured. The wind roared again. But the sound only pulled them closer into a quiet understanding. Luke stood and grabbed a towel, kneeling to dry the ends of her soaked braids. She froze at first. No one had touched her hair since childhood. But his hands were warm, careful, never venturing where she didn't allow. Slow breaths left her chest, like fear melting into something unfamiliar. "Why were you out in a storm like this?" he asked. Nayeli closed her eyes, letting the towel fall against her shoulders. "My tribe left for winter hunting grounds 2 days ago. I stayed behind too long." Her voice cracked. "Some men from another ranch found me. They drank. They mocked my size. They thought a giant girl must be strong enough to endure." She stopped, the memory choking her. Luke's jaw tightened. He wanted names. He wanted answers. But most of all, he didn't want to frighten her with his anger. "You made it here," he said. "That means you're stronger than they were." Nayeli blinked hard, swallowing a rising tide of emotion. "I ran until I couldn't feel the wind. I thought I would die out there." "Not tonight," Luke said. "Not while I'm breathing." Silence filled the cabin, again gentler now, like a blanket settling around them. Luke rose to pour her another bowl, but she reached out impulsively, her enormous hand closing around his wrist. He froze, not because of fear, but because her touch was unexpectedly delicate. "Featherlight, despite her strength, why are you being kind?" she whispered. "I'm not small. I'm not gentle. I scare people." Luke met her eyes, steady as bedrock. "You're a human being," he said. "And you're hurting." "That's reason enough." She looked at their hands, his calloused, hers powerful but trembling, and something inside her cracked open. "I thought no man could handle me," she whispered. "Not the way I am." Luke shook his head slowly. "Maybe you haven't met the right man yet." Her breath hitched. She pulled her hand back slowly, almost shyly, an expression that looked strange and beautiful on her fierce face. Luke returned to his seat, giving her space, but her gaze stayed fixed on him as though he had shifted the ground beneath her. The fire died low, but neither moved. She finished her stew, and he poured her warm water. Watching the tension melt from her shoulders, after a long while, Nayeli murmured, "When the storm ends, do you want me to leave?" Luke hesitated. He knew the proper answer was yes. Town gossip would explode if a giant Apache girl stayed with a widower rancher. But when he looked at her, shivering slightly despite the blankets, her eyes shining with a fragile hope, "No," he said quietly. "You can stay as long as you need." Her lips parted, stunned. "You mean that?" "I do." Nayeli lowered her head, hiding the smile she couldn't hold back. It was small, uncertain, but real. Outside, the storm continued tearing across the prairie. But inside that little cabin, something else took root, something gentler, deeper than fear. A spark. A beginning. And for the first time in her life, the giant Apache girl felt warmth that had nothing to do with fire. Warmth that came from being seen. Warmth that came from him. Warmth she never wanted to lose.